Matt, I'm just curious, because like you said, the university presidents, their first and foremost worry is the health of student athletes. I just wonder, because we've heard, schools, universities, the NCAA itself always talk about the student athlete, right? That's why these students can't profit off their name, image, and likeness. They're a student first. It's about being a student athlete total. I'm just curious if this changes the conversation at all. If these players, let's say this pandemic happened this time next year, right, when players are allowed to benefit off of their name, image, and likeness, do you think, because as we see with professional sports, they're pushing on, and the NFL is acting like they're going to have a season with it's going to be fine. And I think part of the reason why we don't scoff or don't hesitate with pro sports being played is because these are professionals. With college kids, obviously different. Do you think this conversation would be any different at all if these kids were getting paid? And if so, do you think that means these schools and these players are more likely to take a risk and play because at least they're getting some money for it compared to now? You always hear about student athlete, and they should be treated, if students aren't allowed to come on campus, they should be treated like the same students that they are safety-wise. Do you think if money was involved, would this change this conversation at all?
Oh, yeah, very much so. I mean, listen, the reason the professional leagues are moving forward, and let's not forget, is because the players are represented by a union. Almost every league has a union for the players. And, that union has been in discussions with these leagues to make sure that they kind of hammer out the details on how to keep things safe. Look at what Major League Baseball went through. I mean, Major League Baseball, wasn't going to start up right away because their players union, was really kind of trying to hammer out the details of what was going to happen. And even then, you're seeing players, star players saying, I'm not going to participate in this tournament. I'm not going to participate this year for my safety or my family's safety or whatever. They're having those options, at some, at a situation at a college, where you're getting a scholarship and you're not being paid outside of that. It's difficult, because again, if you're a player and you say, I'm not comfortable with this, I don't feel like playing this year because I'm afraid I'm going to get sick or something's going to happen, unless your school has come out and said, we'll still honor your scholarship, and you're welcome to come back at the, next year when things kind of calm down. It's going to be difficult because more than likely you'll probably lose your scholarship and you lose your opportunity to do that. So some schools have said, yes, we'll look at that. We'll be fine with that. Others, again, are not going to be so generous, especially with the financial ramifications. So, yeah, I mean, not being a paid athlete is a huge, is a huge deal for the college athletes because, again, even I don't think name, image, and likeness would have that much of an impact so much on the situation because, again, there's no guarantees here. There's no guarantee that, you won't get sick. There's no guarantee that, things won't happen. But I will say that I think with some of these programs, they're doing, with so much testing and the kind of bubble they're creating, in some cases it's probably safer in regards to be maybe and part of some of these football programs at this time. But again, if I'm a parent and I've got a kid and I'm really worried, let's say they go to a school in a state like Florida or Texas, it'd be really hard, concerned about, making sure that the school's doing everything they can to make things safe because, again, you just never know what's going to happen when we talk about this virus and how it's, kind of struck our country.
And you're right, too. I mean, another thing to add to the concern is that you look at, theoretically, right, the colleges can't do a bubble. But in theory, they have the close thing to a bubble right now where only athletes are allowed back on campus. The general population of students isn't there. And yet you have all these big-time programs still struggling to keep their own players healthy, despite the fact that they're really the only ones on campus. There's still social distancing and workouts. It raises a lot of questions of once the fall semester starts, if these major schools, if Ohio State's going to have 50,000 students back on campus, how the hell are you going to keep, these players safe when now all of a sudden they're they're going to practice, they're going to class, or intermingling with other students? It's going to be, I hope it works out. It's going to be a very, very tough challenge for a lot of these big-time schools if they still want to have as close to business as usual with students on campus and having somewhat of a normal football season. It's going to be interesting to see how they handle it. We're talking with Matt Murschel, national college football writer for the Atlanta Sentinel and host of the College Gridiron 365 podcast. So, Matt, I'm curious because, we're talking about all these different options and how it looks hard to play in the fall. One option I thought that should get more recognition or thought is a spring season, right? Like you said, we don't really know what the virus, but you think 6 months from now, we hopefully are in a better place than where we are now. I feel like the spring, it's more of a guarantee to finish a full schedule. You can have fans in the stands. You can have a season uninterrupted. How come you think so far, at least on July 9th, we haven't had more thoughts and there's been so much pushback on the idea of a spring season?
Well, I think spring has been discussed. I've spoken to several ads and stuff. It was discussed early on. Like, that was one of the models. It's still been there. It's been on the table. I think what everyone would like to do is the idea of trying to get everything in the fall, because of the fact that there are challenges in the spring. There are challenges of getting there. I mentioned a few with the NFL. You look at how the high school impact of this. With the early signing period in December, a lot of kids like to to be early enrollees in January. Well, let's say you move everything to the fall or to the spring, and you start things up in February. Do those early enrollees, are they eligible to play right away? I mean, there's questions about that. There's questions about the National Signing Day in February. What is the impact on that? When you got some of these kids, that's a time for a lot of these coaches to be out recruiting. That's going to be different. Recruiting has changed so much, anyways. We haven't gotten into that.
I know. Oh, yeah.
And so it's there's so much that has to involve moving things around. And I think too, there's, like I said, there is a little bit of a concern that, okay, let's say we decide right now we're going to go spring, and we get to spring, like I said, and there's a second wave or a third wave or something, and then all of a sudden you're looking around going, we're in the same spot we were back in July. We can't play these games even with fans, or we could play these games limited with, without fans. The impact would still be there. Plus, there's television contracts. There's so much that's on the table there. That's why I think no matter what, it's going to take a little bit of time before any sort of decision is kind of made, because they want to make sure that they've worked all these deals out. They've got to sit down with their television partners as one part of this and say, what would happen if we decided to do this? There would be tons of sports going on in the spring, possibly. How would we be able to handle that? And then, like I said, you're talking about players who might decide, you may lose a small percentage of players who might decide, I'm not going to come back because it doesn't make sense. And then there's the idea, this is something I've talked to some people about, is that, you're asking these student athletes to put on a lot if they go move things to spring, because not only would you go through the spring, the spring part, doing this season, but then you'd have a very limited window to get ready for the next season. Normally you have spring, the spring camps, and then you have summer camps, and then you get into the preseason. That's all gone. It would be very much summer would become your spring camp, and then you would jump right into getting ready for the fall. And kids getting injured, kids getting hurt, all those things. And plus, what do you do right now is if you decide to go in the spring, and you decide, let's say you're not going to have in-person classes, do you send all these players home? I mean, and then you risk them having opportunities to get infected, because they're going to be at home. So there's a lot of challenges, and I think that's something that why this isn't just a go ahead, let's just do it and make that move. Again, all that looking at the idea of how do we keep everyone as safe as possible.
It is interesting, and like you said, right, there's no guarantees that the spring will be any safer. I thought it was at least personally interesting that it was kind of poo-pooed or almost shoot out of the way so quickly without at least a little more, at least publicly, acknowledgement, I guess I would say. But Matt, I want to finish up with this. And as we know, yesterday was a depressing day for many reasons. Another one of those was that unfortunately Stanford, just a great and a model athletic department, so many sports, 36 of them, unfortunately had to cut 11 varsity sports yesterday. So I'm just curious, if Stanford's doing it, how big of the impact or how widespread will we see universities cutting not just sports? Stanford not only just cut sports, it cut 11 of them. I know they have a lot, but that's also a massive number to cut. What do you think the widespread impact will be going forward of universities and athletic departments looking at their books if no money's coming in?
Yeah, I think this is something we could see more of. I mean, listen, the budgets are already being cut in some cases, anywhere from 7 to 12%. But then you look at this idea that, okay, let's say we push things back or we limit to what we're doing. There are going to be other sports that are other places where sports are going to be cut. Stanford's case, like you mentioned, they had a lot. They cut 11 of 36 varsity sports. I think Ohio State is the most with 37. Generally, most schools host anywhere between 18 to 21 varsity sports. So, in Stanford's case, yes, they had a lot, but they were kind of the gold standard, when you look at that. So they had to make, it's still a tough decision when you think about percentage wise of cutting these programs. We've had 56 varsity programs have been cut at different schools across the country in the FBS. So again, I think that would get to be, you'd see more of that as moving forward. I think there'd be more, because I just think, athletic directors are going to have to try to find ways to make it all work. And especially with the added cost now of testing and everything going on, I think at some point you're going to see some of these programs that maybe were on the edge right now probably get cut aside, and that's going to be difficult because again you have to talk to the coaches, you have to talk to the staffs, you have to talk to the players. Do you honor their scholarships? How long do you honor their scholarships? That sort of thing. So I don't think this is done. I think we're going to see more of this. They're trying to figure out ways to kind of prevent this from happening, but it gets more and more difficult with the idea of pushing things closer to the spring and after that, because I just don't know if schools have the financial wherewithal, especially at the Group of 5 level, to be able to handle these kind of strains on their budgets at this point.
Right. It's why you hope, I mean, selfishly as a college football fan, you hope that it's played because you just love watching the product on the field, but also, like you said, you see the economic impact. If games are canceled or unfortunately football can't play in general, you'll see, like you said, it's going to get way ugly, and unfortunately a lot of other sports will suffer because of this more than you hope. And Matt, we'll finish off this list. I'm seeing on Twitter now the ACC just announced that it will not allow any fall competitions until at least September 1st. So as we see that timeline slowly creeping back, we have week 0 obviously in early August, and now the ACC is not allowing any competition, football, soccer, field hockey, until September 1st. So I know we probably won't get a decision for another 2 or 3 weeks, at least with football specifically, but you see that timeline slowly starting to creep back and back and back, and we'll see what kind of impact this has if other conferences do this as well. But there's kind of another domino that's kind of fallen, not in a good way for sure, if you want college football played.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and that's that's one option if you can't, if they still want to play in the fall. There's the option of pushing things back, like the ACC obviously is looking at doing. And even then, that would maybe be October, November, but you can't push back too far, because I think at some point you're going to have to make a decision. So it's interesting that with the report of the ACC, it's September 1st. That means, it still would be time for some of those early games, but that eliminates basically any of the week 0 games. So I'm not sure if the ACC had a week 0 game, but that would basically eliminate that as well.
Right, yeah, I know Notre Dame, I guess they technically count, but they already moved that game off of week 0 from Ireland to the first week anyway. But yeah, I have to check if it affects anyone. But like I said, either way, we start to see that timetable go back. Matt, I apologize to you when I called you to start this segment. I'll apologize to you again. Nothing I wanted more to talk about than college football. I know on your podcast, College Gridiron 365 podcast, you're putting out season previews. And I'm telling you, nothing I would love more than talk about, to preview the season, who can, be an upstart team, maybe make an upset for a college football playoff berth. Unfortunately, it was a depressing day for sure. But hopefully, fingers crossed, we can get you on again. And when we do, we'll be talking about real games that matter. We're talking about some teams, coaches, quarterback play. We'll be talking about it all, talking ball. I hope that next time we do talk, we can talk about some real football going on. But we do appreciate you giving us a few minutes here. Thanks so much.
No problem. Thank you for having me.